Okay, so this is joint work that a colleague, Dr. Sarah Kosgrove, and I work on, and we've worked on a few projects with incorporating technology into our classroom. This is the most recent, entitled The Better Blend, Flipping the Classroom, and so we're going to look at evidence from principles of microeconomics. So the idea behind this project was a frustration with students coming to us after exams usually, saying, I studied really hard, I felt like I understood the material, when I got to the test I couldn't do anything. And we get this a lot. And we tried first, our first set of projects dealt with just doing a traditional blend, where we substituted some online lecture content, face-to-face lecture content with some online work and projects. And yet we still saw that frustration. And so we decided to do something different. We decided to think about flipping the classroom. And this is a technique that's popular in a lot of the technical fields. Economics is a rather technical social science. So we thought maybe there's something there. Maybe we can think about developing these higher levels of learning through this flipping. And I'm going to describe the flip in just a minute. Just going back to the blended learning, I should say, even if you look at the literature, and there's a small literature on blended learning in economics, the results are pretty mixed. Some studies find an improvement, some studies find no improvement, some studies find that blended classrooms do worse in terms of student learning, in the best way that we can measure that. So there is some mixed evidence, at least within economics. So we're saying maybe there's something to this flipping. Maybe it's the way we're blending the class that is not producing the results that we want. So what did the flip look like? So Dr. Kosgrove actually implemented the flip. She and I talked before the semester started to develop the class and how we wanted to go about doing it. But she actually was the one teaching the class. So she had a large section of Principles of Microeconomics, 120 students, enrolled in a Tuesday, Thursday, 75-minute class. And so we divided the students randomly into 2 days. So with the exception of a few days throughout the semester, a group of 60 always met on Tuesday, and a group of 60 always met on Thursday. The first day and the last day of class, they all met together, and they had exams at the same time. But every other day, it was either a Thursday class or a Tuesday class. So 60 people a class. There were 2 undergraduate TAs, one for each day. This project was funded by a curriculum redesign grant, and so we were funded with a TA, a second TA, and that really helped. So on the online content, Professor Kosgrove recorded prior to the start of the semester lectures. So for every unit, for every chapter, for everything she wants to do, she recorded it with TechSmith Relay and a tablet PC, and made it available on Blackboard to students before each class, and required that they view these lectures. This was a very high upfront cost to Professor Kosgrove. This took a lot of time before the beginning of the semester. She's lecturing her entire semester's worth of lecture into a computer to record them. And so that does take a lot of time. The other major online content was online homework through a homework management site, which was not very difficult to implement or difficult for Professor Kosgrove to use. What was more interesting was the face-to-face content. And in the face-to-face content, there was no lecture content during the face-to-face classes. And this was deliberate because we want to encourage the students to use the online material and to use the online lectures prior to coming to class. So lecturing in class would have undermined the flip. In other words, if we gave students a reward for coming to class unprepared, and they would come to class unprepared and not watch the lectures ahead of time. So instead, every class started with a quick quiz. So this is a low-stakes exercise, low levels of learning, just to make sure the students viewed and digested some of the online lectures prior to coming to class. What was done during class were scaffolded problem solving in small groups. So we divided the students up into groups and gave them problems to work on. And as students answered the problems, we rewarded that with more difficult problems. So the entire class was devoted to active learning. the Professor Cosgrove and the TA would walk around in the class and answer questions to the groups. So instead of Professor Cosgrove standing up and lecturing as would in a normal face-to-face class, she would go around and see who was having trouble with what problem, and the TA did the same. Now, one thing we had to do, one thing Professor Cosgrove had to do, was teach students how to be in a flipped class, because it's not something they're used to doing. So she actually had to explain to them, this is how you're supposed to digest the lectures before you come into class. You have to take notes on the lectures just as you would in class. And this is something that's relatively new to students, and so it was a little bit difficult to implement at first. And then if there were questions that were common to all the groups, then Professor Cosgrove would stand up and explain those problems. All right, so that's the structure. And we then decided to analyze some results of student learning. So we're a rather empirical bunch of economists, and we like to look at the effect of our policy and treatments in this case to see if they have any effect. So just going very briefly into the experiment that we did a pre-post experimental design, meaning we gave a pre-test and a post-test. We actually gave a test in between. We, with IRB approval, gained additional controls from the student transcript and university profile, so we got IRB approval to do that. And we had control groups, 2 60-student standard blended classes, meaning ones where there was still lecture content given in face-to-face classes, so kind of the more traditional blend that you'd think of. And then we examined the differential gains in test scores, meaning seeing if flipped students gained more between the pre and post than the non-flipped students, and they did, about 10%, 9 to 10% more. This is after controlling for as much as we possibly could control for. So, there's a few conclusions and a few directions of future work that we're going to work on. So, one thing we want to think about is the study behavior, because we're really asking the students to do something completely different than what they're used to with the flip. And so we want to analyze in some way how their behavior changes as a result. A flipped class requires much more preparation than a face-to-face lecture typically. And we want to see not only if the study behavior was adopted by the students, but also do these spill over into other classes? Are they learning how to learn, basically, in this flipped format? That's going to be a little harder to measure. The next step, I think, is to apply to upper-level economics classes. And these upper-level economics classes tend to be even more technical. And so I think these scaffolded problems, this active learning would do well in intermediate theory courses. And I think that's kind of where we're moving. So in terms of the implementation, there needs to be some refinement made to the in-class problems to make sure that we're really building on one from the other. So this is the first time we did. This is a dry run, basically. And so we want to try to refine these problems to make them really capture these higher levels of learning. There might be some small refinements to the structure of the course that will be informed by the study behavior. So maybe we want the students maybe to access the lectures even earlier than they already are. We don't want the students to use the lectures to cram for exams, which is all evidence is pointing that's what they're doing. Even anecdotally, I would walk around liberal arts and hear Sarah's voice through people's computers. So this is, there's a lot of cramming going on, and people are using this more as a cramming tool than as a lecture tool. So maybe there's some way to incentivize using it as a lecture tool rather than a cramming tool. Also, and this might seem insignificant, but it's not, the layout of the classroom really matters when you're doing a flipped class. So this class was held in Dion 106, I think, which is that large vaulted lecture hall. So Professor Cosgrove and the TAs would have to climb up the stairs to meet with groups, and if people wanted to talk to each other and turn around, it would be really difficult. So classroom layout might seem silly, but it actually really matters. And that's all I have.